Hi there, and welcome to The Artist Craft. I'm your host, Stacey Cochran, and we have an outstanding guest with us in studio today. Garth Stein is joining us all the way from Seattle, Washington. Thank you very much for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Stacey.
Well, the book that I have here of Garth's is The Art of Racing in the Rain, and it's been out for just a little over a week now. So how does it feel?
It feels very new, and yet at the same time it feels like I've been with this book for such a long time. You know, I often equate publishing of a book as having a child. You know, first you start dating, and then you make out a little, then you get married, and this is all the writing process, and then you have the little baby, and then the baby grows up, and you're very proud of your baby. And now my baby has graduated from college and is off on his own, and other people, he has to interact with people on his own power, and people get to criticize him as they see fit, but I'm still there to support him. If he ever needs to move back home, I'm there.
Very good. So it sounds like a pretty involved process, and like in the past, I imagine the past week or so, you've had a lot of anticipation and excitement. You've been on tour now for a few days.
Yes.
What is that like, traveling around and meeting your readers now?
It's really great, and the response has been really tremendous. You know, writing is a very intimate experience. You know, it's just you and your computer, and reading is also very intimate. So there really is a connection, I think, that forms between a reader and a writer that's very personal and can be very emotional. And I feel that I had a great deal of joy writing this book, and what I'm finding is that people are having a great deal of joy reading it, and that's all I can ask for as a writer.
Well, that's the best news.
Yeah.
And speaking of emotions, I don't know if you've heard of the book or not, but the book is The Art of Racing in the Rain. I've read it. It is one of the most emotional books that I've read in a long time. So what would you say, we have a lot of writers in our television audience for this, what would you say is the key to writing an emotionally complex book like this in an authentic kind of way?
Well, I think that the key is truth and honesty. Honestly, it really is the dramatic truth. You have to set up your story and your characters in believable situations, so that the audience, the reader, will go with it. And then you have to be true then to, in a sense, your story and your characters take on a life of their own. And if the writer starts to contrive an ending or a reaction that isn't true to the character's nature, then your reader turns off.
Sure.
And so if you're dealing with something, especially like in my book, there are some very elevated emotions that deals with a child custody battle, and there's a lot of stuff that's going on that is very highly charged. So in order to walk that, to keep the audience with me for that, I had to just make sure that I had set their course of action correctly. I really understood the characters' motivations, and that I was true to how they would actually, if they were real people, how they would actually behave.
Well, one of the neat literary devices of this, of course, is that the story is narrated by the family dog, Enzo.
Right.
What were some of the challenges as a writer, as you're thinking, okay, I want this story to be narrated by the family dog? What were some of the challenges to overcome as a writer? Yeah,
well, obviously a dog has limitations. A dog doesn't have thumbs, so a dog can't, for instance, turn a doorknob. A dog has a large floppy tongue, can't speak, can't communicate his ideas other than through gestures. And so this is something that I had to work with. At the same time, a dog is allowed a lot more accessibility to certain things. People will say things in front of a dog they wouldn't say in front of a person. And so in a sense, I got to play with sort of the ultimate fly on the wall. And was limited in what he can do as a character in the story, and yet he gives us a lot greater access to sort of things that are happening behind the scenes that Denny, our protagonist, is unaware of.
And he really functions as a great voice and, like you said, a fly on the wall for the stuff that goes on in the house.
Right.
You know, I don't know that people really think about the fact that their dogs are really in tune with what's going on at a home a lot of times, but
yeah.
it works that way in the story.
Yeah, I think that it really worked out well. We get to filter something through the eyes of this dog, and Enzo has his life view. He has his, he's been raised basically watching television a lot. Whenever Denny goes away to work, he turns on the TV, and he always puts it on a different channel so that Enzo's got a well-balanced education. And Enzo sees a lot of tremendous things, and he sort of develops a very, what he thinks is a complete view of the world, and yet it's based only on what he sees on television, and so there's, by default, there's a real naivete to his the way he sees things.
Well, excuse me. Well, he has a very well realized voice. Like when you were writing this, you you must have had in mind the idea that, he's got this philosophical air about him. There's a wit and pathos that comes through his narration. Did his voice as a narrator, was that something that you immediately latched on to? He said, I kind of want this dog to have sort of a philosophical view of this family and of the world, really.
Yeah, I mean, it really, Enzo's voice was the fun of writing the book. When I teach writing, I talk about, there's the art of writing and then there's the craft. And the craft is something we can teach, right? We can teach about voice, characterization, POV, dialogue, plot structure, all that stuff we can teach. But the art is something that's a little bit different. It's the inspiration. It's the thing that you don't know where it comes from. And, when you're a writer and you're in the zone, that's the inspiration. You don't know where it's coming from, and it just works for you. With this book, with the voice of Enzo, I really felt like every day I sat down to work, I was in the zone. And so there's a lot of decisions that I don't even know where they came from in terms of his voice really just kind of came to me from, I guess, the netherworld where Enzo's soul material lives.
Now, this is your third book. Was this, did you, and I'm not terribly familiar with the first two, I had to be honest. Was this more of an emotional book for you as you were writing it, or how does it stack up to the other two in terms of, I mean, there's a lot going on here. I don't know how much the audience is familiar with the book, but essentially it's the story of this family's love for one another in the face of its collapse, which, it doesn't get any more emotionally complex than that, I think. Right.
That tends to be a theme in all my books. Raven Stole the Moon was my first book, and it was dealing with a woman coming to terms with the death of her 5-year-old son. How Evan Broke His Head and Other Secrets was my second book, and that's a 31-year-old musician in Seattle who has epilepsy, is reunited with a 14-year-old son he never knew he had. So there's a lot of family dynamic in my writing, and to trace where that comes from, I don't know. I guess I would have to go into therapy for a number of years, or I could just keep writing, and I think I'd rather do the latter. So.
Now, the cover art depicts a kind of golden retriever. I don't know how well you can see this on the TV there, The Art of Racing in the Rain. Was that the kind of dog that you had in mind, and then how did that arrive at?
No. Enzo, I deliberately left Enzo's description vague. He knows that his mother is a lab, and his father, he believes, was an Airedale, but possibly was something else. He's unsure of his lineage, which I kind of thought was a funny way. We all have a diverse background. I mean, I know that I'm part Tlingit Indian, Austrian, Irish, there's English in there, and you can always, it's a mishmash. And so I wanted Enzo to have that same sort of I don't really know where I came from, but I think I came from here. When the cover art was done, Archie Ferguson, who's a great guy, art designer, did the cover, and he came up with that dog. And there was a little bit of a discussion about, well, it doesn't actually reflect how he's described in the book with wiry hair and brownish blackish coloring. At the same time, I want it to be every dog. We did a video trailer for it, and
I've seen it. Great.
And that's my dog. That's Comet, who stars in that. And Comet doesn't look at all like what I would have thought Enzo would look like. There's a great cover. The French version has a cover of a black and white dog. The UK has almost a beagle-looking dog. And from the Czech Republic, just kind of a massive blob of a dog. And so it's interesting to see, one, the cultural interpretations of Enzo, but also I think it's important for people to project their own dog and their own mind.
Sure.
When you read, you want to create your own picture. So I'm glad that we don't have to be forced into one Enzo stuffed animal or something.
That's very well said. Well, if you're just tuning in, the guest is Garth Stein. The book is The Art of Racing in the Rain. Digging a little bit deeper into the story, it concerns this family, and the father figure is Denny Swift, who is an aspiring race car driver, which comes with all the hopes and dreams that he has in the story is very much a part of the emotional impact and the way that you build the emotions in the story. Is he has this aspiration to be, a world famous race car driver and very successful. Could you talk a little bit about some of the research that you did for racing and some of the tracks that you visited, perhaps?
Yeah, but first, I think it's important that the idea. Just want to say about the idea of the racing background.
Sure.
Is pushing the limits of what we aspire to. The kind of, for me, the theme of the book is we have to take joy in our daily life. We have to be happy where we are, and yet we all want a little bit more. We all want to aspire to, be a kinder person, be a healthier person, be, a gentler person with our family. And so Enzo is the ultimate goal. He wants to be a man. He wants thumbs and a tongue. Denny has his ultimate goal, which is to be a race car driver. And it's, I think that the idea of pushing the limits, and that's why in the story Denny is pushed so much to the limits with the family drama, with his daughter's custody battle and so forth. So just a little sidebar on that.
And the title, I think the title brilliantly reflects that. It's at once, the art of racing in the rain. At first I didn't know really what that meant before I started reading it, and then as I got into it, it's all about this delicate balance under, duress, really. Right,
and it's about trying to remove, in racing, I raced, to answer your previous question, which I avoided, I raced for a number of years. I grew up in Seattle. I lived in New York for a long time and then moved back to Seattle 7 years ago, and I started racing cars in the rain in Seattle. And you have to, there are certain things that you have to train yourself to do, and one of them is to remove your ego from the race. As soon as your ego gets involved, you become defensive if something happens, or you start criticizing yourself. I made a mistake back there. Well, if you're thinking about what you did back there, you're not thinking about what you should be doing up there, and that's a big mistake, and it means you're going to be going slower than everyone else.
Okay, the big question that I have about the book and the plot for folks who have read it, I know I talked about this with my wife, and she was like, why would she do it? So the big question that I have is, and I don't want to give too much of the latter part of the plot away, but this happens about pretty early in the novel, about midway through the novel. Why does Eve leave Denny? And she takes Zoe, the child, she knows that she's got terminal cancer. She knows she's going to die. But she seems to love, she loves Denny. It seems like a very warm family. And so I couldn't understand her motivation for why she would leave if she knew that would tear him apart.
Well, the leaving is not, she moves in with her parents, so it's not like she separates from him, and he still has, full access. It's just that she lets her parents take care of her because she's so ill, and then the daughter lives with them. I think that's her mistake. That's her fatal flaw. She let her ego get involved. She says to Denny at some point, when I look at you, I see my reflection in your eyes, and it's ugly. And so I think that she lets herself get involved in that moment, as opposed to what Enzo thinks she should do, which is, don't worry about that, let's stay together as a family. And so she takes the path that is a path that people take, but Enzo would tell us that's not the correct path for her.
And one of the things that I was able to suspend my belief with is you've got this narrator who is a dog, and so the story is seen through his eyes. So I was wondering, well, maybe he sees the family as completely loving, but perhaps there is a divide, a bigger gulf there between Eve and Denny. Could you talk a little bit about some of the unreliable narrator, if you will, with having Enzo as the narrator?
Yeah, that's the case. You're gonna your narrator's always going to have a certain amount of bias, unless it's a complete omniscient narrator, and I don't think there's much fun in that, personally. So everything is filtered through Enzo's eyes, and yes, he does have, if he wore glasses, they would probably be slightly rose tinted. I agree. But I'm not sure he's wrong. Honestly, on the Eve thing, I'm not sure he's wrong on that. I do believe that she was trying to protect Denny from going through, seeing her on a daily basis in that way, and trying to preserve her image for him to be pristine in his eyes. I think that's what her motivation was.
Sure.
But it was incorrect. So, now saying that, I wrote the book, and therefore I am very closely aligned to Enzo. So, I have the same rose-colored glasses on that he has. So it's certainly open to interpretation, but and there may be subtext in there that I even am unaware of.
Well, it's great food for thought for readers groups to talk about.
It is. It is good, and I like that kind of. That's where the fun is, and that's why I love doing readers groups. I love meeting with people who've read the book, because, all art, in writing included, is a dialogue, right? You need to have someone who's presenting something, and you have to have someone who's interpreting it. And without the interpreter, the art doesn't really exist. The tree doesn't make any noise when it falls. So people have to bring something to the art, whether it's music or fine art or theater, anything. You bring your life experiences to it, and you see in it what, I found this out when the book was being sold. I was talking to a lot of different editors who were interested in it, and they all focused on one woman said, well, my mother died of cancer when I was young, and so she told me all about this one chapter where Zoe is by herself with Enzo, and that's the one moment that really connected with her. With a different editor, it was something completely different. So that's the fun part.
Awesome. Well, if you're just tuning in, the guest is Garth Stein. The book is The Art of Racing in the Rain, and we've been talking about some of the character motivations and the plot and the story. We're going to kick it over to Natasha Gilliam, who has a book report. So take it away, Natasha.
All right, Stacey, The Prince of Frogtown right here is written by Rick Braggs. It's the final story to a beloved family saga set in Jacksonville, Alabama, where they didn't bother to name the streets. Instead, they just assigned letters. The story chronicles Rick Braggs' life as a young boy, eventually coming of age, and later struggling with fatherhood. Rick Braggs is the son of a dysfunctional father who grew up very poor. Unlike Rick, his stepson is accustomed to love and affection, something Rick never experiences in his own childhood and does not know how to give. Rick's father was an abusive man who lacked the ability to truly love. Rick describes his father as an aggressive alcoholic who deserted his family. Rick never really knew his father, but recalls him dying of tuberculosis. He only learns of his father through stories told by an older cousin. The absence of his father is why Rick struggles with fatherhood himself. Now, it is evident early in the book that there is more than one storyline. The first storyline is Rick's childhood. And then the second one, Rick trying to learn about his father's life. And third, Rick's fear of being like his own father. Fortunately, author Rick Braggs is excellent in his written delivery. He is truly a storyteller. Critics say Rick Braggs writes like his grandfather drank. He cuts loose with wonderful flowering, descriptive floods that can cripple another writer with envy. The Prince of Frogtown is Braggs' latest novel, recently released in March 2008. His most popular memoir was entitled All Over But the Shoutin'. Rick Braggs is currently a writing professor at the University of Alabama, and I definitely recommend this memoir. You will not be disappointed. Back to you, Stacey.
Thank you very much, Natasha. Excellent. Well, if you're just tuning in, the guest is Garth Stein. The book is The Art of Racing in the Rain, and we've been chatting about it. Let's shift gears a little bit, though, and talk a little bit about the craft and the business side of writing. I know
Sure.
a lot of our audience is interested in that kind of detail and information. What is the biggest thing, would you say, Garth, that aspiring writers don't know about how a major publisher works with an author that they should know?
Well, what's interesting is that my last book was done with Soho Press, which was a much smaller press. And I feel that in the editing process, the great thing about Harper is that I've had the same editing experience with Harper as I had with a smaller press. The difference was that there's a marketing manpower muscle that Harper has that Soho just didn't have. So, I think that if what you need to look for is that kind of intimate experience in the editing process. Now, once you get through the editing process and you're into the publishing, you have to become a race car driver. Mm-hmm. You have to divorce yourself from your ego, because then it's a business and it's about numbers, and whether or not your book is going to be pushed or someone else's book is going to be pushed, and in what way and in what venue, is something that you can't get offended by if you're not the top of the heap. Mm-hmm. What you need to do is drive your own race, and you need to you're the one who the book means the most to as a writer, and you have to put yourself out there. I have run into countless people who say, oh, my first book is out. I'm like, what are you doing for publicity? Mm-hmm. And they say, well, you know, it's up to the publisher. And I said, I've talked to this one woman just a while ago, and she said, you know, honestly, I just want to go write my next book. Mm-hmm. I said, no, you have to go out. You have to go out and sell this book and put yourself out there, because you care more about it than anyone else on the planet.
Sure.
So.
Now, and that's something that's, I think, news to a lot of aspiring writers, is that they have to get out and market the book a little bit. I've heard you mention a couple times, I forgot what I was going to ask, now I remember. You've mentioned a couple times divorcing yourself from your ego, which sounds very Eastern. Can you elaborate in the context of the book, and then is that something that you can consciously do, or is it just earned through the course of living life and having a lot of, going through a lot?
I think it's something that I like to think it's something that you can train yourself to do. I mean, I try. I'm not a master of my own destiny or anything, but part of the way that I learned about it was with my children. I have an 11-year-old and 9-year-old, and the little baby Dashiell is going to be 1 next week, so I'm very thrilled about that. And one of the things that when kids grow up, you know, they often will react to something instantaneously, right? Very emotional, with very little ability to monitor what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And it's a very true and genuine emotion, but it's not necessarily appropriate. So what we always say to our kids, my wife and I, we say, take a second, think about what you're going to say and what the impact is going to have on other people before you say it. Mm. Now, if we could do that as adults, not just with what we say, but how we act. Someone cuts you off on the freeway. What is road rage except a spontaneous reaction to that? Sure. If you could take a second, take a deep breath and say, did I get hurt? Am I okay? Did the person do it to me, or is it just something that happened that I had to react to? As everyone's safe, then by the time we got done thinking that, we would no longer be angry. So I guess to relate it to the book, I guess in another way, Enzo has this mantra that he constantly says, which is that which you manifest is before you. Mm-hmm. And what his big theory is that we are the creators of our own destiny, and we have to take responsibility for that. It's not, you know, it's a big job. We have to be aware that everything that happens to us is something energy that we're putting out. And so if we allow ourselves to sit back and be buffeted about by other people's, you know, their desires, then we're not going to get what we want, and it's probably not going to be good.
Well, it's an interesting paradox, you know. On the one hand, we have to kind of, as adults and being functioning people, we have to be able to kind of separate ourselves from our emotions, and yet this novel is such an emotional, I mean, this family is going through the worst kind of emotional turmoil imaginable.
Right.
So there's this interesting paradox there.
Well, the idea is to put them, see, you know, this is the source of drama. Conflict
is the art of racing in the rain.
It's the art of racing in the rain. I mean, but drama is conflict. Without conflict, we have no drama. And so therefore, if I have a main character and he wants to be nothing more than a race car driver, what do? You take the race car driving away from him and make him fight to get it back. So he wants to be a good father. You take his daughter away from him, make him fight. So we have to push people in the drama through the conflict. So that's why, you know, Denny, I believe Enzo in some ways is Denny's alter ego. Denny is very level-headed. He only, I think, one time loses his temper in the entire book. Mm. Enzo is constantly losing his temper. He's reacting emotionally. He says frequently in the narrative, geez, I understand what Denny's doing, but I wish we could just go and get Zoe, sure, and let's just take off for Canada and let's flee. Mm-hmm. So he's much more spontaneous in that way. So hopefully that sort of the alter ego of this I guess philosophy comes through.
Awesome. Well, if you're just tuning in, the guest is The Art of Racing in the guest is Garth Stein. The book is The Art of Racing in the Rain. We've got about 3 minutes left, I'm being told. through my earpiece. I did want to talk a little bit about your background as a documentary filmmaker. We're going to have to fit a lot in 3 minutes here, I'm sure.
We can do it.
But now you earned your MFA in filmmaking. The question I had, we probably have a few people in our audience who might be interested in making movies
Sure.
and being a documentary filmmaker or something like that. When you finished college, were you able to find film work right away, or what did you do to kind of earn a living as you were making?
I did both. I worked in the industry as both as an assistant cameraman for a while. I also was a co-producer, a line producer for a number of documentaries. I was for hire. I was a producer for hire, and I also did my own stuff. And that's going back to, we have to like look out for our own. You know, I worked for other people, but I also had my projects that I really felt in my heart I wanted to get done. You know, the bottom line is, it's all storytelling. It's all about storytelling. And whether you do it in film, or you do it in writing, or you do it in theater, you're still telling a story. So my advice is, you know, learn the craft, understand all these things that we've just been talking about, you know, characterization, plot, you know, a dramatic truth is a big thing for me. So, you know, you have to get your fundamentals down, and that will allow you to ascend.
Now, did you work on the lunch date? I'd done some digging. I didn't see it on your website or in any of the material, but did you work on the lunch date, which was an Academy Award-winning
Yes,
film?
I co-produced that with a friend of mine, Adam Davidson. We were in film school together, and that was his directorial venture.
Can you talk a little bit about the experience of finding out that that film had won?
Yeah, that was, I mean, it was tremendous. I mean, it was a great film, and we really did it on low budget, you know, shooting in black and white and really on the fly kind of stuff. And but it was the kind of thing that had that dramatic truth. It had a twist to it that was very compelling. And so audiences would really react very strongly to it. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, I got to go to the Academy Awards and sit in the audience, and it was really magical. And yet, you know, it happened 18 years ago. So
It was quite a while ago.
someone once said to me, what are you most proud of? And I have to say, the last thing I did is what I'm most proud of. And if it isn't, then I'm not done with it yet. I have to go back and work harder on it. So.
Awesome. Well, the guest is Garth Stein. The book is The Art of Racing in the Rain. I think we've got about a minute left, something like that. Could you talk a little bit about how you found your literary agent?
Well, this particular book, I have a new agent. When I finished writing the book, I sent it to my former agent, and he told me he couldn't sell it because it was narrated by a dog. And I thought that was supremely unimaginative. So we decided to part ways. And it took me a little bit to find a new agent. But what's funny was I was talking to another author who's a friend of mine, and he said, hey, you should call my agent. You know, he might be able to sell your book. My book was narrated by a crow. I was like, well, if he could sell a book narrated by a crow, surely he can do one with a dog. And so I hooked up with Jeff Kleinman at Folio Literary Management, and he has been just a tremendous asset for this. His energy, his intelligence, his connections, he's really been fantastic, and I'm very grateful to have hooked up with him.
Awesome. Well, we're just about out of time here. The guest is Garth Stein. The book is The Art of Racing in the Rain. I've read it. It is one of the most emotional, complex, really just a tearjerker of a book. I highly recommend it. Thank you very much for being on the show today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Stacey.
And for all of us here at RTN Channel 10 and The Artist Craft, we thank you for tuning in. Thank you.